Namaskar. Welcome to this session. From today, we are embarking upon the fourth limb of Pranayam in Ashtanga Yoga. Having completed topic of Asana, now we are commencing to Pranayam. And of course, there will be a long prologue before we really commence the topic of Pranayam. We must understand the relationship of Asana and Pranayam because Patanjali provides a link. After having described Asanas with the sutras ending with Dwandwanabhighatah as effect of yogasana, he says thereafter regulating the breath is pranayam. Any breath regulated doesn't become pranayam. So that the first point to be noted. That in structure of Ashtanga Yoga, we find a link between asana and pranayam. So the breath that is going on, the breathing that is going on after one has attained a state of complete insulation to dvandvas, dualities, that means when the mind is neutral. Thereafter, when the breath is voluntarily regulated, then it becomes pranayam. So it implies that the effect of asana must be in place. So there is no bypass to yogasana to be going for pranayam. Any breath regulated doesn't become pranayam. It is only when the mind attains Dwandwanabhighatah condition. A condition of Chitta rather. A condition of Chitta which is completely insulated to dualities of whatsoever kind. There is a typical kind of breathing going on because the breath is always having correspondence with state of mind, which we will be seeing in detail during our course of delineation on Pranayam, shwasayama. So that's the first thing to be noted, that there is a link between asana, yogasana precisely, yogasana giving you a state, quite inherent state, organic state of duality free condition or insulation to duality. And that breath is to be regulated in shwasayama and pranayama. So that's the first point to be noted, that asana is directly linked with shwasayama and pranayama by Patanjali by using that expression tasmin sati. Thereafter after Dwandwanabhighatah condition has been established in Chitta. So in the light of our times, we have to understand regulating any breath is not shwasayam pranayam, but after the mind is in that neutral state, rather Chitta in neutral state, neutral condition, whatever is the breath, that breath is to be handled. So that's the first point to be noted here. So this fourth limb is called Pranayam, and it is to be again take a note of another thing, that it is not called shwasayama. So we'll have to decipher this condition as to why it has been called pranayam and not shwasayam. Because all the English renditions of the term pranayam have become breath control, controlling the breath and controlling the breathing. In that case, the word should have been shwasayam. Shwasa is breathing. Prana is not breathing. Shwasa is breathing. And so the point of discussion would be centered around this right at the outset as to why Patanjali calls it pranayam and not shwasayam. And this becomes more important particularly because of the expression in the sutra shwasa prashwasa gati vichedaha. So he has made reference to shwasa prashwasa, that is in breath and out breath. So with reference to in breath and out breath, he doesn't say regulation of the breath, but he says regulation of prana, for which there is no word in any other language. Prana is prana. The point is, he doesn't call it shwasayam, but he calls it pranayam. And moreover, because of what we have today, the idea, the notion, the concept prevalent in the world, that we think that regulating shwasa, prashwasa, regulating shwasayama, regulating the breath, regulating the in-breath and out-breath has been considered as pranayam in our times. This is a major flaw. So, we will have to explain it out why Patanjali calls it pranayam and not shwasayam, doesn't mention the breath regulation but the regulation of the life force. If prana is loosely translated, it is life force. Then it should be regulation of the life force and not regulation of the breath. But in our times, this is the prevalent idea, notion, concept that reference is to prana, breath control and breath regulation. So we will have to bring in logic and reasoning here to understand this particular position. So, shwasa or shwasanam. Shwasanam is breathing, that is in breath, out breath. Together is called shwasanam. Or shwasa also is taken as breathing. So, it is an instrument for pranayam. It itself is not pranayam. The breathing is a tool. Breathing is an instrument. So it is means and not an end in itself. It is therefore the confusion that we think shwasanam or something to do with the shwasanam or regulation of shwasanam or regulation of the breathing or regulation of shwasa itself is pranayam. So, therefore, at the outset we have to have this division here, namely shwasayam and pranayam, regulating the breath and regulating the prana. The breathing is carrier of prana. So it is only an instrument, it is only vehicle. the vehicle itself cannot become prana or pranayam. And all the fundamental basic lessons of pranayam, the very primary lessons in pranayam, are all based on shwasa or shwasanam. This is also very true. But the shwasayam cannot evolve as much as pranayam evolves. So, therefore, there is a difference and non-difference in shwasayam and pranayam, because shwasa is a vehicle without which pranayam doesn't take place. You can't say you will overlook shwasa and shwasanam or breathing and will go for pranayam. So that is not possible. It's an inevitable vehicle. So it should be also understood that breathing is so fundamental in pranayam, but breathing itself is not pranayam. It's very, very, very vital, fundamental. Now, why asana has a precedence or it comes before pranayam is because in asanas you learn much about breath. The breath and breathing, they have enormous potentials which are not explored without taking recourse to asanas and without sufficiently going in asanas, penetrating the asanas. So, there are 4 aspects in breath which play a very prominent role. That is called shwasa, shwasantara, prashwasa, prashwasantara, or shwasa and shwasantara, uchshwasa and uchshwasantara. What does it mean? It is in breath and a post in breath retention, suspension or pause, and out breath and post out breath, pause, retention, suspension. So breathing comprises of these 4 components, and all these 4 components have very, very important potentials and manifestations. So in breath and then internal retention. So first one is in breath, second one is post in breath internal retention or internal suspension or internal pause. The third one is exhalation, and the fourth one is post exhalative retention, suspension. So these are 4 factors in breathing. So breathing comprises of these 4 aspects. That is in breath and the link between in breath and out breath. It's a phase. In breath is the first phase, then in breath to out breath link, turn around, or could be a pause, or could be suspension, or could be a retention, and then out breath, and link between out breath and in breath, or a pause or suspension or retention. So that's why it is called shwasa, shwasantara, uchshwasa, uchshwasantara, or shwasa, shwasantara, prashwasa, prashwasantara. they have enormous usages. These four facets of breathing have enormous potentials. Layman just thinks breathing is just in breath and out breath, in breath and out breath, in breath and out breath. But insofar as functions, manifestations, usages, applications are concerned, we must understand breathing by four aspects and not just two aspects. Breathing should not be looked at just in breath and out breath, the two factors. But in breath, out breath, these two, and between in breath, out breath, and between out breath, in breath, two more factors. So they become four factors. So these four factors have enormous usage, application, manifestation, powers, potentials, in our embodiment. But layman just thinks of two factors, in breath and out breath. But to open out the portal of shwasayama, we have to understand these four factors. Because all the four factors, as I said, have different upayoga, viniyoga, and then kshamata, samarthya, avishkar. And these are wonderfully studied, used, understood, applied in asanic, yogasanic endeavor. And that's why Yogasana is a wonderful academy for understanding the potentials of the four-faceted breathing, the powers of four-faceted breathing, manifestations of four-faceted breathing. Asanas become wonderful observatory, laboratory, and kind of a workshop to understand these four facets of breathing and their powers, potentials, usages, roles, functions, acts, efficacies. And regulation in shwasayama implies handling all these four aspects. It's not just handling in breath and out breath, but the post in breath and post out breath phases as well. And handling them and then regulating them, shaping them would be ayama, and therefore it would be shwasayama. The point is, yogasanas give you wonderful academy to carry out your observations and learn the usages, applications, addressals, regulations, understand their potentials, manifestations, usages, power manifestations. Because you should know that inhalation has one power and exhalation has another power. We all say that we live by in-breath. By intaking oxygen, we all live by that. And even common man understands this. So in-breath is energy for our life. If the in-breath has ceased, then our existence also ceases. We would die. Without inhalation, we would die. So we think that's the energy for our life force. And that is why layman is more concerned about the intake of the breath, because common man knows that if you don't intake the breath, you won't live, you would die. Oxygen is so important. The word oxygen therefore has a figurative meaning as well. It is a sustainer. So that's the energy for us, our very living. So if inhalation is energy form, exhalation is a power form. Because most of our powers are drawn by exhalations. So little observation is important, and asanas give you wonderful formal laboratory, observatory, academy to understand this concept that if inhalation is energy of life and energy for our living, exhalation is power. Because most of our exclusive acts need a power, and exhalation gives a power. So somewhere in a formal process, one should understand difference between energy and power. Energy is energy, and power is manifestation of energy. Energy is pure energy form. But the power is its manifestation for particular specific function. So this aspect of in-breath as energy and out-breath as power must be conceived properly. We refer to most of our acts as physical acts and mental acts in our life, or maybe something as a sensory act when it comes to perception. So common man tends to divide the activity as activity of body, or activity of mind, or activity of senses, or perhaps activity for body, activity for mind, and activity for senses. We have motor power and motor organs, and we have mental powers and mental organs, what is called as conative and cognitive, or something also called as ideomotor, with reference to our mind functions. But we do not identify act where the breath is so prominently there. So there are many acts in our life which are taking place due to main agency of the breath. Certain acts are very natural, spontaneous, organic. But we have not identified the breathatic dimension of the activities. Now let me give you a little clarity here, that certain acts such as coughing, sneezing, belching, or yawning, these are all natural acts of the body. We don't identify the breath component and the breath major aspects behind these very natural biological activities. So try to understand what is really yawning. Can you yawn without a specific and typical major usage of breath? Coughing. Can you imagine coughing without the breath coming in as a major component? So when you are exhaling, you know that you open your mouth and you cough, where you send your breath out with a greater gush, greater force. There won't be any coughing without that typical force of the breath. It is not just carbon dioxide going out in that exhalation, but you can cough in front of a mirror and then see what happens on mirror. The sound effect of cough is because of the breath. So also sneezing. In sneezing, it's not just the breath going out with a heavy force, that is the carbon dioxide going on out from the system, but there is some kind of foreign matter which has got into us, into the lungs, and that is heavily flushed out with the act of sneezing. So exhalation is by, the sneezing is by exhalation, but every exhalation is not sneezing. The coughing is by exhalation, but every exhalation is not coughing. So coughing has a different manifestation. Why the cough occurs? The reason should be ascertained. Why sneezing happens? The reason should be ascertained, and they are taking with exhalation. So exhalation, apart from the usual tag that it decarboxylates your lungs, it carries out so many other functions. When you are coughing, when you are sneezing, or when there is belching. Belching is also an exhalative act, but then you are releasing some gas through the mouth to pass out. So also the act of coughing, sneezing, belching, and also sometimes we get hiccups. Can you imagine all these things without agency of breath, act of breath, use of breath, function of breath? So, the breathing carries out so many functions in our biological system. And it's not just oxygenation and decarboxylation. Gulping, swallowing, speaking, smelling. There are so many acts which use the agency of breath and breathing. The breathing is not merely for respiratory purpose, but within the embodiment, the breath plays several roles. And as I said, the most familiar and most natural with our system is belching, hiccup, sneezing, coughing, farting. So, even in the act, in toilet, when we are passing motions, we use the breath, we use the exhalative breath, we use the post-exhalative retentive phase of breath. The farting is also act taking the assistance of the breath. Urinating. So passing bowels, urinating, then a sexual act of intercourse, There is significant manifestation of the role of the breath. Eating our food, swallowing, gulping, drinking water, gulping the water, gulping the liquid substance. So the breath can be identified, playing so many roles which common man fails to take cognizance of. So by breath we do not just live. So many aspects are taking place because of in-breath and out-breath, extra respiratory functions. Outer retention as an extra respiratory function. Internal retention as an extra respiratory function. If you want to lift a weight from bottom, from the floor, see how much, it's not only muscle power with which we lift extraordinary weight, not a average usual weight, but little heavier things when we have to lift, and which entails a special endeavor. Apart from muscular power, we are also coordinating the breath and using the breath, and the breath is taking place for us to lift the weight from bottom, lift it up, and another way to use the breath to get the heavy things down from overhead. That is picking up something from loft and then very heavy thing and then placing it on the floor. So it's an act of lifting and act of placing, delifting, the breath comes differently. So heavy weight to be lifted, heavy weight to be pushed, heavy weight to be pulled, heavy weight to be mobilized. We invariably use unusual manifestation of the breath and breathing, which is extra respiratory. So it becomes a motor of power to assist our physical system of muscles. If you have to take a high jump, you don't just take a jump, but you coordinate a typical kind of breath. If you have to hurl a stone, extraordinary endeavor to throw it to a long distance or high distance, you will be using the breath, and it will be typical kind of breath. It won't be in the respiratory function as much as it will be in the act of hurling the stone. So basically it is important to understand what are the different roles of the breath apart from you kept living. But being living, we do so many functions and the breath does come in. So there has to be some preliminary understanding of how do we use the 4 facets of breath which I told you a little while ago. Out breath, in breath, loop between out breath and in breath, and loop between in breath and out breath. If you are climbing up a hill, it is one kind of breath, one kind of power manifestation for you to climb up, another kind of power manifestation for you to climb down very steep slope. In order that you do not slide down or roll down, fall down and then roll down, you have to climb down a steep slope of the mountain or hill with some control. It's a different power, so that you do not reel down. You will not be reeling up. You have to climb the mountain, but you can reel down while climbing down the mountain, climbing down the hill. So it's a different manifestation and energy form to be climbing stairs upwards. So you have to climb up some 1,000 steps in a staircase. It's one kind of power that is needed, and you have to climb down 1,000 steps. It is another kind of power manifestation. So, it is important to have identification of various functions of the breath and breathing, apart from we just living. Because if you are living, you do so many things. If you do so many things, they are not only physical and mental, but there is major contribution of the breath coming in, particularly extraordinary endeavor of physical nature. You need the breath significantly. You may not need the breath for extraordinary endeavor of the mind so much, but definitely for body you do need. So the breathing provides a lot of energy forms for body, although you might think that it doesn't provide so many forms of energy for mental act, but it does contribute there too. If you are in an intellectual problem, it is one kind of mental endeavor or endeavor of the mind. If you are in an emotional problem, it's another kind of mental endeavor to really defend ourselves or really face successfully emotional turmoil and intellectual turmoil. So the breath does come there also, but it quite significantly comes in physical activities of the body. But we don't count anything as a breathing activity. We count either as physical activity or mental activity or sensory activity. This is too naive. Even in those activities, the breath is such an important coincidental factor, or assisting factor, or coefficient factor, and sometimes a primary factor. So, it is important as to what shwasa, prashwasa, shwasa, and the four phases of the breath do by way of manifesting differently. So that will help us understand the breath in more wider perspective than just taking it as a agency in respiratory system and just its respiratory kind of act of in-breathing and out-breathing, or maybe retention. It has so many manifestations. So a lot of study with regards to Shwasa has to take place, and I want to conclude today's session by saying that this is wonderfully facilitated, this study, observation is wonderfully facilitated by doing several asanas, attempting several asanas, trying several asanas, doing several asanas, accomplishing several asanas, staying in asanas, maintaining in asanas. Asanas for different purposes. The breath is a major factor contributing for its various manifestations. Asanas done, asanas studied, asanas learned practically, asanas observed, asanas understood. While in the practical execution of it, the breath qualitatively and quantitatively shows its multifacetedness. The point is, asanas, yogasanas have come as precursor to pranayam, shwasayama, because of its several manifestations. What body does in asana, what mind does in asana, what body-mind compound does in asanas, doing, staying, maintaining, penetration, efficacy, freedom, trying, attempting, experimenting, observing. The breath is a major modulating factor. This must be testified for having a formal approach in studying shwasayama and then pranayam. The point is, the breath is so important factor in pranayam, and therefore we need to carry out this study with regards to shwasa, uchshwasa, shwasa, prashwasa, shwasochshwasa, shwasanam. So we will have to carry out such a deep study of breath, and despite that it is not called shwasayam but it is called pranayam. This is another thing that needs to be encountered and understood. Anyway, we have just opened the portal for the fourth limb of Ashtanga Yoga Pranayam. Enough for the time being. We will proceed on this in our following sessions. So enunciation to it will continue even next session and maybe some following sessions. So enough for the time being. Namaskar all of you.